Welcome to All Things Marketing Podcast, the podcast that talks all things marketing for both franchise and multi-location marketing leaders. ATM is brought to you by PureDriven. We'll show you how to turn your brand into a money-making machine. Here's your host, Steve Rockwood.
Hello and welcome to ATM. My name is Steve Rockwood and I'm the marketing manager at PureDriven. Today we are going to talk about when you should consider franchising your business. I am joined by special guest Chris Swanson, the CEO at PureDriven, as well as the head of franchise development. Would you like to say hello to the audience, Chris?
Of course I would, Steve, and hello to you. Thanks for having me back again. It's always fun.
Yeah, this is 4 in a row. You're making yourself a household name here, so it's always nice seeing you again. So we are talking about when you should consider franchising your business. I know that you know a lot on this topic, so I'm going to jump into my first question for you here, which is, what is the difference between a franchise and a multi-location business?
That's a great question. One thing I want to just share kind of as a background to this is I've had a lot of experience on the marketing side and sales side on the franchise world, and of course on the multi-location world, and I'll share what that means in a second. But it's important to note, too, that I talk with a lot of people in the industry, and I've kind of got an understanding of what's going on in trends. And it's valuable, maybe, but understand I come from that view of marketing and from a sales standpoint. But basically, the difference between franchise and multi-location business is really, for you that are in franchise, you understand that there is a license, there's an agreement that's given, a franchise agreement, to allow for a franchisee to operate underneath that license. And in the world of multi-location business, a franchise can definitely be considered that if you got multiple locations. But usually when they say multi-location, they're referring to corporate-owned stores. So maybe a corporation owns many locations, and they're a brand, but there's no franchising involved, so that would be considered multi-location.
Okay, that makes sense. And then you told me that you had a pretty interesting stat on the actual number of franchises in the United States. Could you just give me that? Yeah,
well, I mean, I think before the show we were talking a little bit about the increase in franchise establishments. I mean, they've increased by 1.6% on average in 2017, which may not sound like a huge number, but franchising is already a big component of the American economy, the U.S. economy. And so it's very interesting to see that kind of growth. Meanwhile, there's pressures on this industry, as we know, at the national level, federal level, Department of Labor, other entities are trying to figure out how they can treat the employees of a franchisee as the employee of a franchisor, which is, it's got a lot of people kind of freaked out, is the best word to probably use. And that's on the political spectrum. But yeah, that's really, it's interesting. The franchise growth continues because it's a good business model for somebody that wants to get outside of a local market.
Definitely. So actually, speaking of an advantage here and trying to get out of that local market, what are the advantages of a franchise both to the franchisor and to the franchisee? So you can speak to one or the other first and then maybe move to the other one.
Well, yeah, this is an excellent point. The franchisor or franchise, the advantages really are that they can expand, like we said earlier. You know, typically somebody might go into opening a business thinking that they're going to become or that they are a franchise and they're going to go out and build this out all over the U.S. or U.S. and Canada or all over the world. But some other people start out they don't have that idea. They start out with an idea and it turns into, we could actually expand this to other places. And so the franchisor, the advantages of the franchise is that they can use that as a way to get people all over to bring their capital, their dollars to the table to launch that brand all over. And of course, the advantages to the franchisee should be that there is a proven process that is really well defined, both in an operational aspect. So it's very clear how to open the business and how to operate and run the business, maybe even sell the business if you want to exit at some point, as well as a marketing process. You know, typically the brand name is actually one of the big values as to why you'd want to go and buy in as a franchisee to that brand. So
definitely.
So if you don't have that, if you're out right now as a franchisee, really test those two things to say, what is the process? Because I think sometimes people assume that everything is prepackaged and really tight and perfect. And often, franchisees, that's one of the big complaints I hear from them is it's not as tight as they thought it was.
Yeah.
They don't understand the marketplace that they're in particular, and that can happen with overexpansion into new markets that aren't understood. But the bottom line is this model can help both the franchisor expand and the franchisee that wants to get underneath a brand that's growing or already exists and has some credibility because there's proven processes for both marketing and operations.
Definitely. And if you are a franchisor and you feel like you are lacking on the branding side, I have good news because I scheduled a time with Chris's assistant for Chris to come on next week, and we actually are talking about branding your franchise here right on the podcast. So,
and that's a topic, Steve, I love. There's so many good nuggets in that, so it's going to be a great day.
Yeah, so definitely make sure to stay tuned for that next week, and we are talking about branding. Now, we are talking right now about when you should consider franchising your business. So my last question for you, Chris, is what can you do to prepare your business to be a franchise before actually signing on that first franchisee?
And yes, I am so thankful you asked this question because, not joking, I hear more often than not, somebody approaches a brand and says, I think I'd like to be a franchisee, and that's where they start. And that's a little bit of a problem.
Yeah.
You need to take a step back and really, either as you started the brand, understand that you want to be a franchise, or if you have something that people have mentioned to you, hey, this would be a good franchise, or you think, hey, this might be a great franchise, the way it's performing, take a step back and start with a strategy. And there's plenty of great consultants out there, people who can help you through that from a legal perspective. Obviously, in the marketing aspect, how do you take that and create those processes that are much needed?
Yeah.
And how do you continue to grow that brand? But the best thing I can tell you is don't be reactive, be proactive, and understand what you're trying to accomplish. Because what we hear from so many franchises early on, they get in with franchisees that don't understand. They're not as clear on their process. They're not as tight on their structure. And what happens is often it turns into a disaster because there's expectations that have been set that are very hard to undo.
Yep. Well, and it's one of those things where it's almost like when you build a website or software for the first time, everyone needs to know how to use it the first time. So if you sign a franchisee and you don't give them instructions on how to run it, it's not going to look very good in the end.
Exactly. Now, Steve, a couple quick stats that I think matter to people if they're listening to this podcast is franchising is a big deal. There's over 3,000 different franchise companies in the United States alone. Some would argue anywhere from 700,000 franchisee units to 900,000, and the variance there depends on who you're talking to, what's open, what's closed.
Yeah.
Maybe at-home franchises or franchisees. But listen to this stat, because I think this is powerful, and it speaks to what I love as a CEO and a leader and why we co-found businesses and are entrepreneurial. Franchising supports in the United States alone over 18 million jobs.
That is incredible. And then when you amplify that by how many families it supports with those 18 million paychecks, that is a lot of people.
Yeah, so my message today is don't be afraid to get into franchising, but do it in a way that's proactive and you follow the process and you do it as best as you can, hiring those professionals and making sure there's tight processes in place.
Definitely. Well, thank you very much for your time today, Chris. Those are my questions on this topic. So thank you for listening to the podcast, and we will catch you right here next time on ATM.
You just listened to All Things Marketing Podcast. Make sure to subscribe to the podcast to catch every new episode every day. Want to be a guest on the show? Sign up at PureDriven.com/guest. See you tomorrow here at the ATM.